Welcome to the 1% Better Recruitment Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Kiriakou, and this is the show for recruiters, founders, and high performers who want to get 1% better every single day. Every single week, we dive into things like business development, mindset, and performance with the best people in this industry. We also have people outside of the industry that can help you upskill on things that trickle down into your recruitment. So if you want to get better clients, better conversations, real results, this is the best place for you. Before I let you go, make sure that you hit like or subscribe, make sure that you're following the show. And if you are returning, I just wanted to say a huge thank you from me. The engagement as of late has been fantastic. So that's enough from me. Let's get into this week's episode and I hope you enjoy. Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the 1% Better Recruitment Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Kiriakou. Today, I'm joined by Ross McQuarrie. Ross, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. We've got some wicked topics to get into and a very unique story that we've not really explored too much on the podcast. But how are we doing today, my friend?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Charles. Yeah, delighted to join you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries at all. It's been a long time in the making, so really excited to get into this. I think what's quite unique about this episode, Ross, is as I mentioned a second ago, I've not necessarily had people on the show that have started from sort of trainee level and gone to the sort of level you're at. So if we just start things off, like when we first spoke and you talked me through your journey, I was like, wow, that is pretty unique. And I think there are going to be people listening to this that, whether they're a trainee, a senior, a solo founder, that will listen into this, and I'm sure there's going to be like little nuggets of wisdom that you're going to share that can hopefully help people get more than 1% better in recruitment. So yeah, just start off, mate. Give people a bit of an intro to you and your journey.
Yeah, well, without wanting to sound like too much like a cliche, Charles, almost like everybody else in recruitment, I didn't have the intention of getting into recruitment. I guess I fell into recruitment to coin to coin the phrase. I started in recruitment in January of 2007, and prior to that, I'd been working in a bit of a dead end job, to be perfectly honest, for a large water company in Scotland. And I'd actually gone into recruitment business to sort of try and help my own career. Hadn't applied to a role, and at the end of that registration, the consultant I'd met with at the time had said to me, "Have you ever considered recruitment? Some of the things that you'd said that you're looking for, I think recruitment could deliver for you." And here we are, nearly 20 years later. So yeah, I guess my entry into recruitment seems to be quite similar to many others. At the time when I got into recruitment, it was global financial crash of 2008. So it was a fantastic time to join in that regard. The economy was growing, businesses were growing. It was a buoyant environment. Most businesses were hiring, I would say, at the time. And so I counted myself extremely lucky to have joined at the time. The business I joined then was about 500 consultants in the UK, multifaceted from accountancy and finance, which is where my career has been spent. But, just about every other discipline as these multifaceted recruitment businesses do. I joined, I went into an office with 12 other people in our room. I was the least experienced, having started as a trainee. And I count myself so lucky for that. There were 11 more experienced people that I could learn from. And I did what I could to do exactly that. That learning by osmosis that lots of people have talked about that's been lost post-COVID. And I had a great starting point as a result of that. And the training I got was also very traditional recruitment training. Shout out to a guy called Gary Coccaraccio, who you maybe have come across on LinkedIn. Gary was a fantastic trainer and very sort of natural style of business development. And but it was traditional recruitment training, so it was probably more volume based. It was more KPI led, and that was the framework in which the consultants were judged, and that was ultimately the framework that they tried to manage the business. Recruitment has evolved since then, of course it has, but I count myself really lucky actually that I was in that environment, because a lot of the behaviours and training that I got then still stand me in fantastic stead today. So I was there for about 4 years, and like many other people, I guess, that I've seen move in recruitment, you reach a point in your own development where you sort of there's often change, nothing certain and nothing surer, excuse me, than a lot of change in a medium to larger recruitment business, and there's a lot of change happening round about me at the time, and you look around and think, you know, I've learned, I've got my own network, I have reached a stage where I want to put a bit more of my own slant on how I do things and maybe work in less of that structure. And I therefore moved to a new business, a larger recruitment business. One of my ex-colleagues had joined that business, and that was a bigger recruitment business. Ironically, I'd probably envisaged myself going smaller at the time, but at the time there were about 2,000 consultants across Europe, across the globe, excuse me, and again, I felt that by working with bigger clients, with higher profile clients, and working in a bigger office, I felt that there was quite a lot of learning for me to be done then. And again, that was a really successful period of my career. And actually, that's I look back at that time in my career, that move in particular, as one of my fondest times. The team that I was in was fantastic. I've got friendships from that team that I still have today, and it was a real sort of environment of camaraderie in that particular team.
Hey guys, quick one before we jump back into the episode. If you are a recruiter who feels like half your week disappears into admin, follow-ups, data cleaning, and jumping between several different tools, then listen up, because this episode is officially sponsored by Sourcewell. Sourcewell is the recruitment productivity platform, and I don't just mean another tool that you'll forget to use. I mean the tool that actually gives you your time back. You can run your entire desk in one place. Outreach, sourcing, data enrichment, multi-step email and LinkedIn sequences, inbox management, and even call notes. It's all there, synced, automated, and according to their stats, recruiters using Sourcewell see 56% higher response rates, double the pipeline, and approximately save around 8 hours of admin every single week. If you're like me, admin as a recruiter is the devil, and this productivity platform really helps you save a load of time. So reach out to Sourcewell, go to sourcewell.com. It's a fantastic platform. I've used it myself. I really believe in it, and I'm super grateful for them sponsoring the podcast. Let's get back into the episode.
Which wasn't always the case in recruitment teams that I'd worked in the past, but that one most definitely was. So again, I was there for about 3.5 years, 3 years, and almost the exact same happened again, Charles. After a period of time, you're sort of looking around at the people that you're working with, thinking, who can I learn from? What's the right route for me from this point? Is this the right environment for me to be productive in the way that I would like to be going forward? And I do believe a lot in you're a product of your environment. And one thing that individuals that more often than not we can control is our environment. I got an opportunity to join the business that I'm in today, albeit it was a different business at the time. So Wilkinson Associates is the business that I'm currently co-owner of. And at the time, it was set up by a chap called Ian Wilkinson, set up about 23 years ago. And Ian had trained in Hayes. So had a fantastic network, fantastic business, and I'd been in competition in my previous role with Wilkinson Associates a lot. And so they had a fantastic reputation in our marketplace, and generally seen as higher quality, lower volume, and experienced people on the tools still operating in that sort of hands-on manner. And so I had an opportunity to come and join this business in 2014, and I did. And it's been the most enjoyable, sort of successful period of my career to date, Charles. So we're nearly 12 years in, about 11 and a half years into my time here, and the business has evolved a lot. One of the big attractions to me coming here were were two of the main principals in the business. So Ian Wilkinson, the previous business owner that I referred to, just a wealth of experience to learn from, and I needed that at the time. And a chap called Guy Gracie, who is our managing director and now my business partner, one of my business partners, should I say. And Guy's been my mentor in recruitment, most definitely the last 12 years, and singularly, he's the person that I've learned the most from. And again, I was in competition, so I'm saying that in the context of I was in competition with him prior to joining this business. I say competition, I was often getting beaten by him, Charles. So I had the opportunity to come in and be part of a much smaller business, going from an environment of, as I say, about 2,000 consultants globally to a team of about 10 at the time. So there was a notable shift there. Couple of big attractions to me for doing that, as I say, as well as the opportunity to learn from these people that I'll be working with very closely. The style of recruitment was exactly what I was looking for from the perspective of it's relationship led, not sales led. It is very focused on integrity, and we will really focus on doing what we can to enhance a recruitment process. Not necessarily control a recruitment process, if you follow what I mean by that, but that was the model, and they were doing that fantastically well at the time that I joined, and that was a huge attraction, for me. So our area of expertise and the majority of my recruitment career has been spent in qualified accountancy and finance recruitment. So mostly placing qualified accountants into what we would refer to as industry. So moving candidates from chartered accountancy practices into different companies across Scotland, and that's what W&A's area of expertise was at the time, and it remains most of what we do currently as well. So in 2019, the previous business owner had indicated his intention to take early retirement and take a step back. That coincided just with a stage in my own development and ambition, coupled with two of my colleagues in the business, coincided very nicely with us being at a stage in our careers and development where we were looking for that opportunity to step up. And so that conversation in 2019 was a catalyst for us to do an MBO, or a vendor-initiated management buyout, to give it its Sunday best name. So ultimately, Ian was looking to take a step back, and we were looking to take a step up in real sort of basic terms. So that started off a process in 2019, which the first bit of that concluded in December of 2020, when that became official. If you remember what the landscape was like between middle of 2019 and end of 2020, wasn't a particularly conducive environment. We were all wrestling with with COVID and everything that presented to guess. To us as humans, but most definitely to the recruitment sector. So understandably, that sort of elongated the conversation. And one thing that was really surprising to me at the time, and hopefully of interest to your audience, is just how difficult those conversations were around the MBO. So if you can imagine a scenario whereby you've got previous business owner who's 100% shareholder, and you've then got his employees, as we were at the time. He wants X valuation for the business, and we perhaps want Y valuation for the business. And of course, in any of these processes, you can hopefully find some common ground for it to move forward. And ultimately we did. But you're talking about somebody's life work in terms of the way that you're buying and valuing their business. So as a starting point, you need to have a huge level of investment in the relationships. And you need to continue to invest in those relationships as you're going through those conversations. You're then looking at where is the value in the business, so not necessarily the valuation, but who is adding value in the business, and how therefore is that bit valued. And you've got quite a complicated conversation around merit, amongst other things, Charles, as well as things like future ambition, and who's going to do what post sale. And as I said at the start there, that proved to be much more complicated than I envisaged at the time, because you've got different sort of levels of priority, and the way that it's been described to me in the past, sort of shareholder, director, employee, and I guess I am all three. At the time when we were going through the MBO conversation, all of us had to think of being all three: shareholder, director, employee, and there are competing priorities within those. Even still, for me today, I need to make some decisions based on me thinking as an employee. I need to make other decisions based on me thinking as a director, and so on. But if you can imagine quite a condensed period of time where, frankly, if I speak for myself, frankly, I was learning every day, Charles. I'd never done that before. I've never done it since. So learning about actually not only the mechanics of how you might buy a business, and everything that goes around that, then understanding how you run a business, but then the emotional side of if we are going to run it, how do I delineate my responsibilities as an employee, as a director, as a shareholder? And at what point in that negotiation, as you're buying the business, do I need to act as an employee? What point do I need to act as again? So you can see the point I'm making. It's a real delicate balance, and I've said to many people since then, had it not been for the strength of the relationships that we'd built up across many years in our business, I'm not sure we would necessarily have gotten there. And it was so apparent to me that why so many businesses invest in advisors to help them through this, because that objective, independent view can often play a part, a real part actually, in helping conversations go over the line. And so, whilst we did have advice, at the end of the day, you're talking that most of us had worked together at that point for at least 10 years together. And so, whilst you've got advisors, you've got a lot of just emotional equity tied up in one another. And at my belief then and now is, I believe that if you've got something to say it, but do it in a respectful way. And had it not been for those strengths of relationships, I'm not necessarily sure that we would have. I'm not necessarily sure that we would have gotten it over the line. However, we did, and I'm delighted that we did. So that became effective in December of 2020, and since then we've had control of the business and been running the business since then. And that's the next part of the evolution. Really is, I guess, me as an individual, as I said a minute ago, learning about how you do the deal, and then post deal, how do you actually run a business, having never run a business before. And I'm fortunate from the perspective of that I'm not doing that on my own. And I do believe in strength and strength in numbers, but yeah, that would sort of bring us on to the next stage in evolution.
If you've made it this far into the episode, do everybody a favour and just like or favourite this particular episode. Make sure you're following, make sure you're subscribing, whatever platform it is. And if you're not going to do it for me or because of the love of the show, do it for Marshall, the star of the show. Do it for Marshall, because if you don't like this, if you don't follow it, if you don't upvote it or subscribe, Marshall's going to be really upset, and no one wants to see Marshall upset. So do everyone a favour and like, follow, subscribe, whatever platform it is, and Marshall will be happy. Anyway, let's get back into this episode, shall we? Yeah, nice. Well, I think the interesting part for me is that where I've worked in quite a few businesses, but also externally and speaking to a variety of different types of businesses and listening to their offers and stuff. And that thing has popped up in conversation before around, the stories you hear in the industry where someone starts off as a trainee or a senior consultant or whatever, and then they buy a part of the business. So now they're a shareholder. Obviously, where you've been through that, that's what I found quite interesting for this conversation, because when you haven't personally been through that, or you've just heard it through the grapevine, you've not actually really seen it in a business that you've worked at. It's almost like how many recruitment businesses offer shares, right? Like I had shares in like my last two business, but like they're basically meaningless unless that company sells and you're still there, right? So
Yeah.
like when you first get it, when you're like in your early 20s, you're like, wow, you tell your mum and dad you got shares in this business, like kind of doesn't really mean a lot. But talk to me a little bit about that process, I guess, like when you went and became a shareholder. So like now you're, because we're going to talk a little bit about your responsibilities as an owner, and I know we're going to talk about the sales culture, the supportive culture, driving revenue and stuff. But talk to me a little bit about that process of when you eventually went from consultant. Like what did you do during that MBO process? Like what did you do? What did you have to do to then go through that essentially?
Yeah, well, without wanting to state the obvious, Charles, you have to learn, and you have to sort of operate outside of your comfort zone. And as they say, generally growth happens outside your comfort zone, don't they? But I think sort of at a very practical level, uh, there has to be a delineation of thought process. As I said, that if you think of that model of shareholder, director, employee, and personally, I had never been the shareholder before. So if you think of it in that structure with shareholders sort of looking down into the business, not looking down on the business, if you see what I mean, but looking down into the business, then often that can mean that the decisions that you make are not putting yourself first. And as recruiters, that doesn't come naturally to us. And actually this is where some of the conflict is derived from, because that's actually a really good trait in a recruiter, that they do want to come first, that they do want things to be about them, and that they are ambitious for themselves. And I would say most of the best recruiters that I've worked with have got a selfish streak, Charles. It has to be managed. Yeah, exactly. It has to be managed in the right way. And that was a challenge for me, just from the perspective of not so much putting others first, but if you've been in a scenario where you're in a competitive environment, to then potentially put that aside to a judge on the bigger picture, for the greater good, not to keep using cliches, then clearly that's something that you have to, well, simplistically, you have to do. And another thing that one of our previous advisors had said to us in our business, we were often, myself and my business partners now, we often talked about, what if we can't reach a decision on something? What about if I want to go in that direction and somebody else wants to go in that direction? The word that you and I would use, of course, is compromise, Charles. Not everybody's willing to compromise. I'm not willing to compromise on everything. But the advisor at the time, who was our non-exec at the time, said to us, "You will just have to find a way." And whilst to some extent that sounds a bit flippant, it's also true, because if you want the business to move forward, and you believe in the business moving forward, you won't always get your own way.
You've got to do
And
what's right for the overall business. Yeah,
exactly,
100%. It's what
yeah,
what
yeah,
what what you were talking about a second ago. It really reminds me, and I think this is valuable for people listening, because I was always told when I first got into recruitment, this will be your hardest year until you become a billing manager. And then when you become a billing manager, that is the hardest year that you do in recruitment. And I didn't realize what they meant until I became a billing manager. And I think to your point, what you just said, it reminds me so well is as a recruiter, you're almost programmed to make sure you're hitting your number, make sure that you're filling your jobs, make sure you're pulling your jobs, etc. When you're looking after a team, I'll give you an anecdote that will make total sense to you and to the listeners, right? I had a guy in my team and he was doing really well with business development, etc. But like me, he wasn't necessarily the best at finding the candidates. I had one guy on the team that's phenomenal at that. I had this kind of habit, I suppose, from my boss that if I didn't do a bullhorn search on the CRM and just found a candidate on LinkedIn, but they were already on the CRM, he'd almost like politely, jokingly, banterly threaten me by saying, if I found that candidate, I'm going to do a split deal with you. Like it basically trying to get me in the habit of doing the bloody basics, right? And I remember one instance happened with that guy on my team where I found this candidate and I was like, well, you haven't called this person yet. And he was a little bit reluctant because he didn't know if they were right. I called them, they were right for the job. When we were about to go and put the deal through, I was going to do like a 50-50 split. And he sat down and was like, mate, you're my manager. Like, you should be supporting me. And I'm like, I'm trying to teach you like the way, like you should have found that candidate yourself. Sat down with my boss and he was like, look, I get what you're doing. I know we done a similar type of thing, but now you're a billing manager. What's happening in your mind is you're thinking about your target. Forget your target. Think of your team target, right? Think about what's going to happen long term, the confidence that he's going to get. You've shown him the right way. Obviously, if it happens again, then no. But the first time, give him that, get his morale and his confidence up and go, that's like, I'm telling you how to do it. And just think about your team target. And that was the day that everything kind of clicked. And I was like, oh, I'm literally thinking I've got a target to hit every month, every quarter, when actually, no, it's my team's target. So
yeah.
even if I only do like 50% of my personal target, but the team hits 100%, that's fine. And that was like that little mindset shift of like, oh, it's company, team, me. Whereas as a recruiter, it's you, team, company, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that that is a very good example of uh, you not coming first
Yeah.
any longer, and sort of decisions that you're making for the greater good. I think, yeah, as you say, Charles, that is a good example. And if you think about that multiplied, I mean, the bigger the recruitment business, the more challenging that becomes. And
Mm.
we're a small business, Charles. There's ultimately 11 of us in this business, but I can totally appreciate just how big a headache that becomes. If you're in an office that's got 50 recruiters, 100 recruiters, and each of them are experiencing similar things to what you've just mentioned there. That going back to that competitive edge or the selfish streak that we talked about. That's hard to manage. And uh, I think I've got a lot of empathy for people that are managing large teams in relation to that, because it's definitely easier said than, most
Mm.
definitely easier said than done.
Yeah, no, 100%. I've never really managed a team in sales bigger than like three or four, and we didn't really have internal L&D or external L&D people come in. And because I managed people that were non-native English speakers, so they were doing like the DACH market and stuff like that,
Okay.
mate, honestly, like I look back and think, how the hell did I manage that? Because every single time a guy would do a call in German or French or whatever, I'd have to sit down and go, cool, right. So talk me through the call. What did you say there? How did they say that? And like when you were experiencing recruitment, you can spot when someone's trying to blag you, right? Like they say, oh, the client said this. It's like, how did you deal with that objection? Oh, I said it like that. And you're like, did you? And this is like pre-AI, pre-note takers. Do you know what I mean? So you're just sat there and like the amount of time that you would spend doing that like post-call coaching when you've got your own shit to do is like
Yeah.
it's mind-boggling. And before we move on though, when it comes to like the MBO aspect of things, just very quickly, talk us through that particular process there, because I think it'd be quite interesting personally for me because I've heard about it, but I've not ever really been a part of a business where that's kind of happened. What was like the trigger? And what was the process of doing that MBO for you to go from like a recruiter or whatever it was to them essentially being like co-owner of the business?
course, yeah. So the trigger is that the previous business owner wanted to sell. So that essentially was the catalyst, Charles. Thereafter, you go through the construct of putting something together called an SPA. And the share purchase agreement, and that ultimately becomes the terms for the MBO. Clearly, these can become ultra complicated. Ours wasn't, because we're not an overly complicated business, but if you can imagine, what some of these SPAs are like for some of these huge transactions that go through, no wonder you need teams of lawyers and corporate finance advisors and stuff to help you. Thankfully ours was relatively straightforward. But your external advisors, your non-execs can help put the SPA together, and as I said, that ultimately becomes the framework for the mechanics of how you would do the deal. In our scenario, without going into too much detail, we those of us that were buying the business had to put money in to the business to ultimately secure our shareholding, and then there's a series of different clauses is probably the best word for it, that clauses and milestones that therefore have to be met within the SPA in order for the deal to conclude. So a very obvious one would be, if we've paid X for the business, and we then take ownership of the business, and it tanks thereafter, and that therefore has an impact on future shareholder earnings and dividends, then clearly that's not a good thing, at the risk of stating the obvious. So there has to be some compliance and some metrics around how you're going to, again, simplistically, how you're going to take care of the business going forward, but most definitely how you're going to help the business perform and how you're going to manage that performance as you're going through the deal. And different deals will take different periods of time as well, Charles. Some will happen quickly. The initial bit of ours took 2 years, not including the year or so the conversation through COVID. So it happened over a long period of time. So that, as I said, the SPA becomes the framework for it, and as you are hitting these milestones within the terms, that is the marker of how the deal is progressing, and ultimately is one of the markers of if it's a success or not. And those would be, different businesses would have different milestones within theirs. Again, a recruitment business is quite simple, Charles, as you know. The main milestones for us were basically revenue targets and overheads targets, simplistically. And we have the point I was making at the start, or one of the earlier points I made about how the conversation could become a bit tetchy as you're going through the conversation, to actually buy the business. That was one of the things that I was just referring to there. If the vendor thinks, well, it should be worth X by then, and we say, well, actually, it's historically difficult to forecast in recruitment. We don't think it's going to be worth that. Then we think it's going to be worth this. Then you're then leaving yourself exposed to, well, what are you going to do to make it worth that and not that? And that's where some of the real sort of emotional conversations can come into it, because you're almost feeling that you're being challenged on what you're capable of, and potentially challenged on what are your intentions once you've got some ownership of this business. So, and again, I keep coming back to it, but if you don't have that strength of relationship with those that you are buying in with, then then I can only imagine it getting quite bloody for certain people. But yeah, that was the process that we went through, Charles. And
Yeah,
as I've
nice.
said, I can only speak for my experience of it. But that's what worked for us.
Yeah, yeah, nice. Well, I think that kind of moves us on nicely to the next part is and you've loosely talked a little bit about that transition from being a consultant, director, owner. But one of the things when we first spoke, when we're talking about like topics we wanted to discuss was kind of your duties as an owner and helping to kind of manage the pipeline prospects for other recruiters and also like another thing I'm quite interested to dive into as well is the culture piece as well. When I've worked in businesses where you've got like a strong leader in the office that's present all the time, that is driving activity, etc. And then I've also worked with the other businesses where perhaps the owner has that mindset of do as I say, not as I do type thing, like get on the phones and they're not on the phones, or let's all be positive, but they're the first person to kind of be negative and things like that, right? So I guess that I think, and feel free to tell me where you would like to start, but I think when you've transitioned to being that owner and having to take on a lot more responsibility, maybe we start with that culture piece. I think that's the foundations of a business, right? What have you done or what have you learned throughout that period of time since going through the MBO as now an owner to help maintain or grow the culture within the business?
Yeah, I think again, this sounds a bit like a cliche, Charles, but how do you value the culture? Because I think culture, excuse me, is arguably the most valuable thing in any business. Yet, what value do you attribute to it? And so, I think you're right to start there, and it should be something that leadership teams are spending a lot of time on. It's a real balancing act, Charles, because the best recruiters, in my experience, can work autonomously. And you want to empower them to work in that manner. Um, and but also recruiters need managed, and I say that as a recruiter. Uh, and I know that there's most definitely been times where I've needed managed, and even still, Charles. So I think that's the balancing act. If you can imagine a scenario where you've got lots of successful recruiters doing what they want on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, each of them will individually be successful, and therefore you could therefore suggest that the business would be successful. But is it being as successful as it could be by letting recruiters do what they want? And there's been times in my career where I'm like, just leave me to do what I want.
Yeah.
But clearly that is one of the biggest dynamic shifts, as you were referring to, about going from being in the business to being one of the people sort of running the business. So I think firstly, it's baby steps. And that doesn't come naturally to me, Charles. My business partners have really influenced me for the better when it comes to that. If it were up to me, I would have changed a lot in the first week. But actually, that's not that practical, and it's maybe not the best thing. And it comes back to the earlier point that you made about, whilst that might have been right for me, maybe not right for the business or everybody else in the business. So I think, and again, this is where it becomes a game of opinions, doesn't it, Charles? I think that if you're going to try and improve a culture, and more often than not, you're not going to want to do the opposite, are you? But if you're going to try and improve a culture, then it has to be based around the people that you already have. And it can't be too much of a wholesale change initially. So what has been the best bits of the business and the culture? And to use an example for us, Charles, we're really fortunate that the average tenure in our business is very long. On average, with the experienced people that we've got, we're in excess of 10 years in the business. And I think our average tenure in recruitment as a team is about 15 years per head, the average tenure of how experienced we are in recruitment. So we do have an experienced team. So I'm mindful that, and that's been our choice to have the business model of that. So I'm conscious that other people might feel slightly differently about how you change a culture, particularly maybe with lesser experienced people. But in our scenario, I think less is more. And initially, I didn't think that at the time, as I said, but I've subsequently realised that that's the case. And what really is a culture when it's sort of boiled or stripped right back? It's the environment in which people can perform. I believe that's what a culture in a recruitment business should be formed around. Why we can maybe come on to chat about this later, but why is it so many people don't perform in recruitment? And in my nearly 20 years in recruitment, I've seen more people that haven't performed than have performed. And does that mean that everybody that comes into recruitment, or the majority of people that come into recruitment, haven't been good at it? I would always challenge that. I think it's an environmental thing, going back to the stuff that we spoke about earlier on. So I think that you can't change too much initially. Looking at what has made your culture good up to our point, and our point was strong relationships built up over tenure, a lot of loyalty that comes from that. If I had to summarise that, Charles, the way that the previous ownership and we have done that is about the long term, and that's probably how I would summarise our success from the perspective of we more often than not have a long term view on everything that we do, including hiring people, and we don't look for quick fixes. If there's a quick fix to be had, great, but actually we generally try and make decisions that we can stand by over a longer period of time. So what does that translate to on a day-to-day basis? Less pressure, because you know, all of us in recruitment know that today is important. Making money today helps tomorrow. Of course it does. But actually, should making money today be at the expense of tomorrow's culture? No, it shouldn't ever be that, as far as I'm concerned. And actually, if making money becomes top of the list in culture, again, more often than not, I've seen that fail. So I think an environment that's generally bred over the longer term, that gives people some certainty that things and some comfort that things can go wrong. In recruitment, a lot can go wrong. Charles, as you know, so much of it out with the individual consultant's control. And what we definitely don't want is a culture that people are blamed when things go wrong. Of course, people make mistakes. I'm making mistakes myself still, and I will continue to do. It's human nature. Making mistakes isn't a problem. You should never have a blame culture for people making mistakes, and actually, you should try and have an environment where mistakes are acknowledged but coached as well. And again, that's one of the things that I know that we've gotten right. We've always tried to put the human first, as in, you've got a billing consultant, you've got their desk, you've got the revenue attributable to their desk, and they've got a target. What underpins all of that is them as a human, and how are they going to show up to work, and what have they got going on in work, outside of work. And actually, if you can identify that, all of that feeds into the environment in which they'll thrive, going back to the point about culture. So we have, it might sound strange to say, we've invested a lot in that, but actually not in a very meaningful way. Not to contradict it, but we treat one another as we want to be treated. That phrase, do unto others as others would do unto you. And actually, to me, if you've got that coupled with respectful challenge, that's probably all you need. It doesn't need to be too, it doesn't need to be too complicated. And that's where we've seen success. The harder bit becomes how you kick it on. If you want your business to grow, and whatever, grow itself is subjective. Are you looking to grow headcount, you're looking to grow profitability, you're looking to grow revenue, you're looking to grow your reach. Probably all of those things. How you kick it on to the next level is the harder bit,
Yeah.
and I guess that's where that's probably the stage in evolution that we're at now is how you kick it on.
Yeah. Well, mate, there is so much to unpack from what you've just said there. I think one of the first things that rang a bell to me is I had Kalpesh Baxi on the podcast recently, and he was talking about building communities, building, rec tech companies, recruitment businesses, etc. And he was interesting, and I put this clip out on YouTube, and it's done really well, where he said, when you're starting a business or starting a community, if you're starting with the idea of getting rich, I'm not saying that you're going to fail, but it's going to be so much more difficult. So you don't start with the money in mind. And I've always said that, over the years that if you get really good at a skill, grow a really cool business, a really cool product, a really cool service, the money will follow, right? So having that as part of your culture is, I think, for anyone listening to this that's running a business or has ambitions to do so, yeah, it's important to get deals done. But if you are that type of recruitment businesses, and this is a lot of businesses I see right now that aren't kicking on, are the ones that are just hunting for a deal, and that's it. They're not building those long-term relationships and partnering with companies that they're, doing multiple deals with and having that good relationship with, right? So that's one of the things there. But something that you were mentioning about, the fact that you guys have got really good retention and kind of the ins and outs of the culture that you guys have. I was thinking, as you were saying that, like the businesses I've worked at that have had a very, very great culture, a high performing culture, and then the contrary, like the really poor culture. And maybe you'll agree with me with this, and maybe you've worked in businesses or know of businesses like this with those bad cultures. From my experience and from people I speak to, where the culture starts to dip, as I said earlier, when the leader is do as I say, not as I do, where it's a blame culture, there's a lack of accountability, a lack of ownership. When you're working in a business and the owner is the last person to take ownership and point the blame and verbally call someone out in front of the office as well, like when I've seen that or been on the other end of that, that's when I'm like, you're not going to retain people long term at all. Like for me as a leader, when I first got into leadership, I don't know if you familiar with Jocko Willink at all?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I've read his book or listened to his audio book, Extreme Ownership, after I watched his TED Talk. After I watched that TED Talk, I had to show it to the entire business. And then we found a video called Good. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Unbelievable. Whenever I'm like feeling a bit like, oh my God, I watch that. It's 2 minutes and it's him talking about whenever people come to him with an issue, he'd always say good. And everyone's like, why do you always say good? And he's like, well, if I say good, then I know there's an opportunity. There's something I can do about it. So maybe I've learned like it's fine. Don't worry. Good. And we had this culture in the business that, say, for example, a deal drops out, the boss would just look at you and go, good. And you're like, it's
yeah.
not good. The deal's just dropped out. That was like a 15K deal. And he's like, well, you've got an opportunity. Go and find someone better. And you're like, all right. But lo and behold, you take that on, you go and call the client, and all of a sudden, yeah, it weren't right. Now the relationship's better with the client. And as soon as that culture and that extreme ownership, like dripped through for the rest of the business, you started to see trainee consultants, if something like that happened, analyze what they've done and go, do you know what? I could have done that better. Then the manager would go, do you know what? I should have been more on top of that. Then the owner would turn around and go, actually, I should have been more on top of the manager. And then all of a sudden, there was no blame across the business. And then it started to kick on and the high performance started to kick on and stuff like that. So I think that's really good. And then finally, with like the really good cultures, what I've seen and from my experience is you have the very successful people in the business that aren't like back in the day where they're very protective of what they do. Like the really good businesses I see, and I see a lot of companies do this now, and a lot of people that are on the pod talk about this, is where the top biller will be very like on a Wednesday morning, they'll be like, right, guys, I've just closed the company's record deal. Let me talk you through how I've done it. And maybe you might have a different style that you could do it in your way. And that comes on to my last point because I'm rambling now, but companies that also identify that your style, my style, and so and so style over there are different. So when you've got a company that go, well, when I was a recruiter, I used to do this, and if I can do it, you can. Right. Okay, sure thing. But some people aren't necessarily as good as that aspect. And it's all well and good. You can incrementally get them better, 1% better on those little parts, right? But you've got some people that, for example, like I don't know if you've seen this in your career, introverts back in the day in recruitment were like not frowned upon, but companies just wouldn't want to hire someone if they're an introvert. You need to be
Yeah.
really like laddie, salesy, or whatever, right? Actually, some of the best recruiters I've ever met are very introverted. They don't really enjoy going out and doing face-to-face meetings. They'll still do them, but they don't really enjoy it. But they're so detail orientated and so process driven that actually, by the end of each month, you're going, oh my God, like your numbers are insane. How have you done that? And I've just got a really clear process. Now, you can probably tell from me, I'm more of a sort of yellowy personality. I'm quite chatty, right? I was a bit of a maverick as a recruiter. I didn't really follow much of a process. But because I was so in tune with my personal development and I was grateful enough to work for a boutique business that had that culture, that I could learn from those process driven people. Those process driven people that maybe didn't have the strongest relationships would look at me and go, how are you building such good relationships? What are you asking? Like, what are the types of questions you're saying? What are you doing in those face-to-face meetings? Can I come along for your next pitch, etc.? So the detail-orientated person would come with me to do, like see how I would pitch our services, and notice that the first 5 to 10 minutes we didn't talk any business chat. It was just pure like, how's the family? How old are your kids? What do they do? Blah blah blah. And then you get into business, and they were like, oh, okay. I would just go straight into business. Like, why have you done that? Well, I've done that because now they know who I am as a person. They buy into me, and the whole conversation is so relaxed. So if there's any objections that pop up, there's not that wall. There's no friction anymore because we get on. But then I observe the process-driven person when they're at their desk, and they're so methodical with what they do. Like, this is the first step, this is the second step, and I'm like, okay. So then you kind of merge them together. You learn from what they do and vice versa. And for me, that's what. There's obviously various different other aspects on how to build a culture, but from my perspective, where I've seen the good and the bad and all those types of things, that's how I think you can build like a really solid culture and the foundations in a business. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that how you've described that is very accurate, Charles. And I think if you've got the best of process coupled with the best of human, then you've nailed it. Uh,
Mm,
and actually, by the best of process in the current age, you could talk about, the best of technology, the best of digital. I think that's what they're looking to. That's ultimately what a business could framework be going forward. So, yeah, I totally understand that. And the other, I feel like a cliche machine today, but you know that people buy from people. Uh, that remains fundamentally true. And I think as long as there are people in jobs, and as the AI and the robots coming to take all of our jobs, but as long as there are people in jobs, then they will always uh, prefer some people over others. If you and I were to go and pitch for the same job today, the decision maker might prefer you, might prefer me. We could deliver the exact same pitch, but as you said, you're more yellow. You've got better chat than I do, and it can be as simple as that. But actually, the process bit, and particularly as you're looking to sort of grow what you do, whether it's, as I say, whether that's scale or actually enhance what you do, the process becomes fundamental. And to your point about the top biller communicating what they've done to the rest of the team, and just imagine the compound impact of that. If that's harnessed in such a way that technology gives us the opportunity to harness that
mm.
going forward. So I think there's a huge opportunity in that, and for any business that's not leveraging or uh, transposing what their best people know into the remainder of the rest of the team, then they're missing a trick. So no, I think yeah, I
Mm.
think you're spot on.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the last things we are going to talk about is that the supportive culture and that fine balance between being really hands-on and hands-off. Because as you rightly mentioned earlier, I was the exact same as a recruiter. I needed a little bit of guidance. And I remember when I was about 23, 24, one of my managers said, you're like one of those Hot Wheels cars that you wind back, let go, and then it just fires off. But sometimes you wind yourself back and you're off bang into the wrong direction. So I'd be
Yeah,
working a lead that I'm never going to pull, for example, when I've got a hot job there that I could be working, right? So sometimes as a young recruiter myself, and I know a lot of recruiters that are like this, if their manager is on them for every single call, like, right, okay, where we're at in the day plan, they go, oh, leave me alone. Like, I know what I'm doing, go away. So sometimes that little bit of guidance, just being there, because you can also have the opposite where the manager or the founder knows that the senior con in the corner knows what they're doing. So they never speak to them until they don't do a deal. And then, oh, what's going on? It's like, oh, so you're only speaking to me and checking in with me because I haven't done a deal. So there is that sort of fine balance. But then equally, what you were saying around when you have that culture and you've got the good foundations, you're managing attrition, etc., like kicking on as well, because there's being supportive. And then, maybe someone has, a target of 200 grand a year or whatever, and they're hitting target, but they've got more in them. You just know it. And you know that you're looking at their ratios on how many jobs they're pulling to how many they're filling. And you go, there's something there. I know that we can get you to do more. But that again, that comes from the what we spoke about a second ago, the culture. Because there are some businesses where they hire people and those consultants are very content with hitting 100% target and that's it. And I've seen recruiters and it kind of blows my mind that they hit target and they're like, cool, whatever. Even though it's uncapped commission, right? Because I used to play sales reps and I'll never forget, this might make you laugh. I was doing an interview in our office and they said, oh, you've hit this number every single quarter. How come you've not pushed on? And the candidate turned around to the client and went, well, it's capped commission. So as soon as I hit my target in the first month of the quarter, I just put my feet up for the rest of the quarter. I'm like, what? That's not good sales. Like, why wouldn't you? And he went, okay, so if I worked for you and you said to me that if I hit my quarterly target in January, and I had the ability to earn more money, then I would do more sales. But if I don't have the ability to earn more money, why would I do more sales? What's the point? I remember both the hiring managers looked at each other and went, I don't like the answer, but I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. But I don't think I've ever worked in a recruitment business where they've capped the commission. So for me, in my brain, and maybe this is my own bias, but if I hit target in the first month of the quarter, I'm going to push on. But there are some people that are like, well, I've hit target, so I'm not going to lose my job. I'm just going to chill. So I guess from my question to you then is like, how do you in a business, when you're running a business where you've got a really solid foundation of the culture and stuff, but people are capable of more. Obviously, you don't want to push them too much because I've seen that before and that can ruin people and affect retention. But how do you implement stuff to really push on then in a business?
So without wanting to give you the most basic answer you'll ever have received on your on every episode of your podcast, Charles, simplistically, I think you need to help people. And to elaborate on that, I believe that as business owner, it's my responsibility to make sure that my, or in our case, our business performs. And if something or someone in the business is not performing, that's my responsibility. And whilst of course there's a responsibility on the individual to perform. Of course there is. I'm not suggesting that there isn't. But actually, there has to be an element of identification as to why that person or that thing is not performing. And that's on the business, that's on the management, the leadership, regardless of ownership or not. That's on the leadership of the business to identify those. So I think very simplistically, you have to help people. And as bizarre as that might sound, Charles, I think what you were alluding to earlier, which I have indeed seen, is not that many recruitment businesses are going to go above and beyond to help their people. If you don't swim, you'll sink.
Yeah.
And if you are sinking, we might not throw the ring in to help you. And that doesn't get the best out of anybody. As you said, some people would say that sort of fear culture it does work, and maybe it does for some people, but I think it's probably a smaller group of people that works for. And so so to your point, what do you do? I think you have to give them the tools that they need in every single aspect. So to your point about the process, Charles, it's if we talk about it as the leader or my business, as I said, it's incumbent on me to make sure that things are in the business the way that I want them to be, or at the very least the way that I think that they should be. And if it's my business, it's up to me to make sure that that desk performs. It's also up to me to make sure that that desk is fed, for want of a better word. And in many scenarios, if you think of another sector, another business, a manufacturing business, whatever type of business it is, in what scenario do you have the employees driving the strategy? In what scenario do you have the employees determining where the revenue is going to come from? That doesn't happen in other businesses and in other sectors. I've only experienced that in recruitment, maybe other service sectors, but whereby, I hire you and say to Charles, you've got a wee bit of experience in X, Y, or Z before. Go over there and try and do X, Y, or Z, please. I would like you to do this amount of money in this amount of time. I'll see you next quarter type thing. That is just fundamentally the reverse of what it should be. If it's my business, it's incumbent on me to say to you, here's the clients that we would like to work with. Here's some tools to help you engage with those clients. Here's, whether we're talking recruitment parlance or not, the warm desk versus the cold desk. It's up to me to make sure there are as many warm desks for people to come into as possible. It's granted if somebody can bring a warm desk, brilliant. But actually, it's up to me to make sure that the desks are warm. And so whether that is giving people things like resources, things like marketing content, things like data enrichment, training, time, whatever it is that any one individual may or may not need. And as you know, it's invariably a balance of all of these things for people. But in order to move people from sort of good to great, to coin the phrase of the book, then it's up to the business to help them get there. Of course, some individuals will be driven to get there themselves, regardless of the environment that we're in. But going back to what we chatted about before, if we don't have that environment, then how many people are likely to get there? So I believe that for every single recruitment business, the leaders should be helping the people that are on the tools to identify what size is their market, who are the businesses and people they want to transact with in that market, what's the size of the market share that they currently have versus what they might like to get. And then once that's all identified, what's the plan and the strategy to go and execute against those things. And again, in my experience of recruitment, that has been left to the recruiter.
100%.
And as I said, I think if round the recruitment boardroom table, if you were to compare that to other sectors, and I know it's not the same, so we're not comparing two of the same thing, but other boardroom people around the boardroom, they'd be laughing their head off at the fact that some businesses are just like ultimately leaving the strategic direction and the success to the employees. Of course, it's intrinsically linked. You can't have one without the other. You need the employee to perform for the business to succeed. Of course you can, but actually, it's fundamentally on the employer first to identify the opportunity that the employee has, as far as I'm concerned, and not the other way around. And that's what's gone too far wrong in recruitment. So I believe that's the thing that you do to kick it on to the next level and try and create that supportive environment by giving them as many tools as you can.
No, 100%. Well, when you were saying that, it reminded me so much of when I pivoted my career from doing healthcare locum recruitment, like temp workers, to doing more commercial medical technology sales reps, and you're dealing with VPs and directors, not like a ward manager, right? The first ever manager that I worked with, one of the top billers there, she was then setting up the contract desk. They obviously hired me because I had contract experience, but it was like a lot of businesses, come in and after you've worked the job for a few weeks, you do a presentation to the company on your business plan and stuff. I'd never done a business plan before, right? I'd never went to uni. Like I was like, in terms of like academia, like I was terrible, right? So my presentation was just, I'll be honest, it's hilarious. It was the funniest, worst presentation in the company's history to date because it's riddled with memes and stuff. I just thought I'm just going to put my personality into it. Literally, at the end, one person went clap and then noticed no one else was clapping and was like, oh, all right. And then one of the other managers was like, mate, what the fuck was that? And I was like, what? He was like, that was terrible. And I was like, I'll be honest with you, I don't really know what I'm doing. And they were like, have you not sat down with your manager to be like, what are we actually doing? I was like, she doesn't really she's like, figure it out yourself. And I'm like, I get that I've got to figure out some aspects, but when you're new to something, you kind of want a manager to, like what we were saying about that balance between hands on and hands off. Like you sometimes need a bit of an arm around the shoulder, a bit of a hug and a bit of guidance, right? And I didn't have that. And unfortunately, that particular manager, I don't really think she ever should have been a manager. I think she was a great recruiter, but she wasn't very good at management. And I remember there was this one time where this consultant who was just, those consultants that are just non-stop on the phone, just making hundreds and hundreds of dials, and like you're looking at that person going, wow, like it's motivation for me, like I'm going to do more activity, I'm going to match it. And I think he made like 50 calls in an afternoon and not a single pickup happened. So she just grilled him in front of the whole office, like do the voicemail. He was starting to leave a voicemail and she just hung the phone up and went, that was terrible, like that. And I'm just sat there thinking like that's not leadership to me. Like you're just bollocking the guy in front of the entire office. It's not good. Anyway, the reason why I'm bringing this story up is that when something changed in the business, I had an opportunity to move market. Now, the market I moved into wasn't like a hot desk. It wasn't like a super warm desk. No one had really managed to get the most out of that particular market, but there was a few customers there that, we had terms agreed with. We didn't make placements, and that there was enough business there for someone to make something of it. And I remember the first time I sat down with my new manager and I was like, look, mate, like the last market I was doing, I didn't really know like who I was placing and you know what it's like when you move markets, like that biggest limiting belief you have is you don't know the market. So you're speaking to clients and you're not truly a specialist or a market expert because you've only been doing it a few weeks. So he sat me down and bless him, he spent a whole hour like, right, this is what the job titles of the candidates you're going to be recruiting. These are their responsibilities. These are the types of things they sell. The people that lead these functions, these are their responsibilities, their type of personalities. As soon as he went through that, I was like, okay, I've got a bit more understanding of what I'm doing now. Who am I actually targeting? What is my ICP? And thankfully, they were like, look, there's 10 businesses here that we have met with or have terms with, but we've never really been successful. Start with them. And then any companies that are similar to them, here's a way to look on LinkedIn or Google. Then start building out your target client list and any candidate leads or job board leads, put that into your leads list and just go out, mate. And don't feel like there's a lot of pressure. Just build relationships. We know you're good at that. If you build the relationships, the vacancies will follow. And I was like, right, okay,
Yeah.
cool. Mate, honestly, no word of a lie. 2 weeks later, I left a voicemail for a company. Lady called me back on Friday because they were all in the car, right? Field salespeople, wanted a chat, took the job on. Colleague turned around and went, oh, so and so would be great for that job. I was like, okay, find this candidate, call him. Oh, that's my dream company. It's like, brilliant. Next week, submit him. Following week, got a deal. I was like, oh my God, I've been working in this new market for 2 weeks. I've already got a deal. Then another client picks up the phone, calls me. Oh, I've got a couple of emails, whatever. I'm looking for this sales rep in the southeast. I'm like, oh my God, things are happening. And then all of a sudden, it's that
Yeah.
snowball effect of like all
Yeah.
of the process that I've been taught, that bit of guidance. And every time I took a job spec on, my manager would just be next to me, but like not like say this, say that, don't say this. That supportiveness of just being there, and every time I'm asking a good question, the high five to reinforce the positive habits. If I'm asking a question that's not open, it was a closed question, he pointed at the wall where it says open questions, who, what, why, where. And I'm like, oh, sorry, let me rephrase that. So what specifically are you looking for? Whatever it is. Took that job on, placed that job the next couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden, I think I did like 23 grand in a month. Like average fees were like 6, 7K. Got best newcomer of the year, and then all of a sudden now I've got the evidence that I can do this. I've got the confidence and I've got someone that's supporting me and guiding me in the right direction. And then year on year after that, just all net new business, and it was fantastic. And I think that goes to your point where you were talking about that supportiveness and figuring out what makes you good. Like, what are your key personality traits, your communication style, your methodology of how you do things? Let's really triple down in those things. But then equally, there are aspects of the job that you are either avoiding or not so good at. So let's gradually get better. Like, for example, I think it was like 3, 4 months into the job, my boss said, let's see a LinkedIn project. And I went, what's that? And he was like, you haven't made a LinkedIn project. I didn't know. And because I was just like laser focused in what I'm doing, I was like, I don't know how to do it. But again, goes back to how good the culture was. Instead of bollocking me in front of the office or in a one-to-one going, this is unacceptable, he took ownership and was like, maybe I didn't take enough time to go through that. Let me walk you through this. This is going to change the game. Obviously, lo and behold, it massively changed the game. So yeah, that's my little rambly rant there. But I think those types of things there for people listening to, that's what I felt really made the culture in that business. And also, if that didn't happen, I wouldn't have been the recruiter I turned out to be honest.
Yeah, one of the things that you alluded to there, I think, is spot on, Charles, and you didn't use these words, but alluding to the fact that um, happy recruiters are generally successful
Yes.
recruiters, and success breeds success. And lots of people I've spoken to in recruitment over the years talk about recruitment. When recruitment's going well, it doesn't feel like a job,
Yeah.
and it most definitely doesn't feel like a hardship. And if you know, no recruitment business will be successful all the time. I know that some people might say that's defeatist, but I'm probably too much of a Scottish realist for that. But in actual fact, if you can keep it good more often than not, and actually you can keep the individual happier more often than not, the happiness and I think success are intrinsically linked. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right to identify it in that way.
Yeah, mate, what you said there, by the way, money. I say that every business I ever work with, sometimes you get the founder look at like the founder will look at me, sorry, and almost cringe when I say when your consultants are happy, they'll be more successful. And they kind of look at you, go like, oh, all right. And I'm like, no, genuinely, if they're coming in, and I had a guest called Steve come on, I think his episode will come out before this one. And he talked about recruiters that look at it as a job versus an opportunity. And going back to the example I gave you, when I had someone that was supportive and I was enjoying what I was doing, I didn't feel like it was a chore to stay late or do that extra call or whatever it was. I felt really happy. And also, something that I've always implemented in business I work with and as a manager myself is not only figuring out what that consultant's business goal is and how they need to hit target, but also outside of this job, forget this job for a sec. What outside of life is going to make you as a better person and a happier person? And once you figure those things out as well, one of the first ever hires I had wanted to get engaged, and we reverse engineered his targets on how he's going to, like, what's the engagement ring you're going to buy? Where you're going to buy it from? How's that going to make you
Yeah,
feel? Also, like, oh, you know what it's like when you start a job in recruitment, you don't exercise, you don't go to the gym because you're laser focused on the job. That then counteracts your activity levels and stuff. So it's like, right, what are we going to do in the gym? How's that going to make you feel? And then following those things outside of recruitment, and whenever they came back from the gym, oh, I hit a personal best on deadlifts today. And you see how they're feeling about that, and they're bringing that into the job, and it trickles down. And it's the same thing when you're doing your job. If you're doing really well in your job, that trickles down into your home life and your family life. You know, it's like if you're struggling at work, the market's bad or whatever, or your boss has been a prick to you, you come home and your missus is like, "Oh, how was work? Oh, I don't want to talk about it." Like, it's the same thing outside of work. If you're having trouble at home or in your personal life and stuff, it trickles into your work. So yeah, that I think as a final point before we move on to the last question, happy consultants definitely are
yeah.
more successful, and success breeds success. So that's a wicked point. Awesome. Well, look, mate, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this today. I really enjoyed this conversation. As you know, the last question I finish off every episode with is, following this particular episode, how can people get 1% better in recruitment?
For me, Charles, it's invest in your IP. Uh, as an individual, as an organisation, invest in your IP. The intellectual property that recruiters have in their head is so valuable. And when we were chatting earlier about that example that you'd given about the top biller sort of communicating and cascading what they had done, that is ultimately the IP that the business owns, and there is a financial value that would be attributable to intellectual property. And so by investing in your IP, not only are you enhancing the business, but actually you're enhancing the prospects for the individuals within it. And so at a very practical level, like what is the IP that you might have in your head? And because of how sort of technology is advancing just now, we're all in this sort of fantastic age where we don't need to remember things because technology can do it for us. The human mind, as fascinating as it is fallible. technology is also fallible, of course, but if you, by investing in your IP, and specifically in the modern age, Charles, like your data, so if you look at our recruitment business, the intellectual property can be identified through multiple data points just across your business, and a recruitment CRM should be the most utilised tool in the business, and maybe slightly secondary to the recruiter's expertise, but in essence, by investing into the IP, but by making sure that the data points within the CRM to capture the IP are there, that's the win, because the nature of how the markets and have evolved and how skill sets are evolving. We are in an environment where companies are selective. It's going to become increasingly harder for people to be hired, just generally. I think just, if this advancement of technology continues, I think it's going to be harder for people to be hired. Therefore, businesses are going to be more evaluative. If businesses are going to be more selective and evaluative, recruitment businesses need to be attuned to that, and we need as many data points as possible on what makes us good and actually what makes our database strong. So much of historical recruitment has been based on what one person has in their head, and that's what's seen them and that's what's seen them succeed. And actually, that's more often than not how a business success has been determined by the IP that people have in their head. But actually, if you capture that and nurture it and invest in it, to my mind, 1% is just the start. Sort of incrementally, the opportunity from investing in your IP is massive.
Yeah, love that, mate. Really good answer. Like I said, really enjoyed this. I'll put all your details in the body of the description. And for people that have made it this far, thank you very much for tuning in. If you like the video, please like it. If you're new here, subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of the 1% Better Recruitment Podcast. If you got value from this episode, make sure that you're following the show so that you never miss an episode. And if you're listening on a platform that allows it, a quick rating or a review really helps people find the podcast. Feel free to share it with someone in your team or your network who you think would benefit. And just remember that small improvements daily lead to big results over time. So, thank you again for tuning into this week's episode, and I'll see you next week.